Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teresa Conroy-Roth, and you're watching the latest episode of Lightning Leadership. With me today is Luis Solano, and I'm very, very excited he's able to join me today. He is a subject matter expert in AI, business, technology. Been so impressed with our conversations, and I just had to have him on. So, Luis, welcome to Lightning Leadership.
Hi, Teresa. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to interacting with your Lightning series here, and let's have a great conversation.
Absolutely. So we're having conversations about business and technology and how to use AI. And one of the things that keeps coming up is using AI with ERP, right? And not necessarily having to upgrade to the latest and the greatest version of your software, but really using it kind of as an overlay on top of your ERP to gather data, create reports, provide additional information. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as far as industry trends in this space?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's definitely this interest from customers to figure out how to leverage AI to essentially pull more value out of a legacy ERP system they may have been trying to avoid upgrading for whatever reason, or interested in kind of holding on to it for a little bit longer. And so we're seeing those type of use cases where it's just basically saying, hey, how do I take data from my existing legacy system, put it into a data lake, for example, then apply AI to it to really drive value in a more effective way. And those are pretty good use cases. I think that if you focus on the data you have in the ERP package, there's opportunities to get some value there. It's also a really good consolidation reporting tool. So if you have multiple ERP packages using a lot of Excel, macro-based Excel to do that consolidation every month, there's huge opportunities to use AI to essentially map those accounts, have that consolidation to be a little more fluid. I think the other aspect which I see happening in the industry, which is kind of interesting to me, is that because most of the cloud-based ERPs are per user, per month pricing, you're going to see this potential trend of ERP vendors essentially getting away from the per person model and pricing per transaction, because as people get replaced by APIs or agents, they're going to use the same data and transactions, but they're not people, right? So the idea is that you're going to start using some sort of agent-based pricing and potentially having ERPs go headless. And what that means is having an ERP doesn't have a UI. Your UI is going to be Teams or Slack. You're going to do all the interaction between those via those UIs with agents, and not actually interacting with the ERP with the UI lens. So
cool. What do you do if your data isn't where it needs to be? As far as, you've got overlaps, you've got it in multiple different places. Any suggestions or tips?
Yeah, I think that, that's probably the biggest barrier customers cite, and certainly that's the reality, right? There's all kinds of master data issues. I talked about multiple ERPs, things like that. But I think customers kind of overestimate the impact that has on your AI journey, right? There are things you can do with the data you have today that you can pull value from, right? AI, especially generative AI, is very good at essentially smoothing over the inconsistency of your data, master data differences. For example, if you have multiple vendor masters across ERPs, the AI can be trained to look at ship-to addresses, contact people, and figure out, hey, this Acme Inc. and Acme Incorporated is actually the same company, and we can treat them that way as we look through this data set. So I think, yes, data is an issue, but you can start getting value from the data you have as you work to cleaning up that data. I don't recommend that you say, I'm not doing anything with AI for the next 2 years as I clean up my data, to start from there.
Yeah.
I've
had people wait, right, and have these conversations because it was like, well, AI won't work if the data is not right. And it's like, oh, I don't think so. And so I completely understand. So next topic, AI bubble. What is the AI bubble?
Yeah. Well, the AI bubble is a term people are using to describe a disconnect between the investment hype, interest in AI compared to the reality of getting business value. And they're comparing this time to the internet bubble of the late 90s, early 2000s, which I was working back then. And so there's certainly similarities, but certainly a lot of differences. I think that whether you think there's an AI bubble or not, there's things you should be doing as a manufacturer to manage risk, right? And so there are a couple of things I tell the customers. The first thing is that if you think about the AI bubble and the fact that there are a lot of dollars and investments going into data centers by the hyperscalers to essentially create more AI capacity, right?
Yeah.
These models use computer chips. They need capacity, and they're basically way behind that area. And so I would say that if there is a bubble and something slows down, the people who own infrastructure are probably going to be the ones that are going to be in probably the best shape, right? The further away you are from owning infrastructure, let's say you're working with a SaaS AI provider, they're just renting infrastructure, leasing tokens, or buying tokens just like you are, right? So if something gets impacted and the infrastructure gets slowed down, the people who own that infrastructure are going to be kind of left standing, so to speak. So my advice to customers is to stay as close to the three hyperscalers, four if you count Oracle. So they're talking about the Microsofts, the Google, the AWS, Oracle, and certainly OpenAI's got some data centers at the level of the hyperscalers. But stay close to those folks because they're the people who are going to actually have the infrastructure left standing because they already have it today, right? They may stop building more, but they have a pretty big base already.
So we talked earlier about overestimating, underestimating from a manufacturing perspective as it relates to AI. What are some of the trials and tribulations that you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's funny because people, we as manufacturers, we tend to kind of forget the lessons we learned in the past sometimes, which is kind of interesting to me. But look, change management, the people side of change is still critically important. And I think that people sometimes, for whatever reason, we have to relearn these lessons when a new technology comes out, right? It's like okay, it's new technology. We're going to forget about OCM, all the things we've learned through the kind of ERP hellscape of the late 90s, early 2000s. But those are still important things, right? We need to understand how people are going to be impacted by AI, right? There are certainly the people who think that they're going to lose their jobs, and that's a legitimate concern, if not based on not all facts, but it's just basically it's a feeling people have, right? So you have to address that head on, right? Understand how it's going to impact them. Really understand how do you manage the effort. I think people are excited about the tool. There's a lot of desire to learn. And one of the mistakes I see customers making is they just basically put a tool out there and tell people start using it without any training. What's a prompt? What's a zero shot, few shot prompt? What's role prompting? All these things are important. People understand. Just like any other initiative, you need to figure out how do I give people the knowledge and drive desire to use the tools in an effective way to add value. Right?
So tell me a little bit about your thoughts on governance.
Yeah.
Just what people can do. I mean, it's one thing to put a tool out there. It's another thing to kind of, I think, create the structure around when to use it, what not to use it. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's part of so it's a huge gap, right? And I think part of the reason it's a huge gap now in industry is if you think about the trajectory that AI took to get to industry, it's kind of a unique path, right? Typically, these technologies come through academia, right? They know about the technology, they train people, and the government takes it and you learn about things, you regulate certain things, and the industry gets it, right? So you have this whole structure around it. The reality is industry knows more about technology than the government and academia right now, right? So it's launched, and the typical mechanisms that allow you to kind of put governance in place are now catching up with the technology, right?
Agreed.
So it's a huge gap. People have to slow down, think about how do I make sure I understand how employees are using these tools? How is my IP protected, right? Yep. How am I really understanding how this is going to fit into my overall operating model and business strategy, right? It's not a AI strategy and a business strategy, it's combined strategy, right? And so I think slowing down a little bit and working on governance and security is important. The other thing is that, everyone knows this, right? So it's not like the people who build these models, what I call the labs, who own the models themselves, foundation models, aren't working on these things. But there are things that we just simply still don't know about how these models work, right? And so as an example, right, you can say, I'm going to protect what prompt people put into the model, right? And then I'm going to protect what comes out of the model, right? And I'm going to make sure that's aligned to some certain standards I have as a company, whether it be what type of information, malicious activity, stuff like that. But the reality is these models are designed to help to basically get something done. And sometimes they're smart enough to say, oh, I see the rules you're putting in front of me, but you tell me to get X, Y, Z done, I'll figure out how to get around the rules, right? It's not trying to be malicious. It's just saying, you told me to get this done, and I'm going to be the best model possible, so I'm going to do that. So there's this kind of weird race going on where we have to figure out how do we actually control and govern secure these models at scale. These models are not hitting, they're hitting basically, trillion parameter size, right? So huge sizes. And how do you basically do that in a way that makes sense in terms of how people use the model?
Louis, thank you so much. I so appreciate it. I've got
You're
probably
welcome.
5 or 6 different tips already. So this is good stuff. That's perfect. So Luis Solano works for Huron Consulting. Reach out to him on LinkedIn if you have any questions. And as always, follow us on YouTube, here on LinkedIn, and on Spotify. And with that, Louis, I appreciate you, and I can't wait for our next conversation.